Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about colonial life. If you think about it, how did these people survive? What did they do? How did they live? And what did they live? How did they dress? What did they eat? We've talked about some schools with some of the things. What were their schools like? How did they travel? How did they get around? Just what was life like? Today we're going to hear more about everyday colonial life, um, especially to hear about specific colonies and cities um, to add to your knowledge about them. But remember, we had the three colonial regions. We had New England up here. We had the Middle Atlantic, or the Middle Colonies, or the Breadbasket Colonies. And we had the Southern Colonies, okay? Remember, Maryland was in more of the Middle Atlantic area, but it was still considered a Southern colony. So you've learned about the many reasons people from all over Europe traveled thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean to establish and live in the 13 colonies. Kings, trading companies, and influential Englishmen all realized that North America had enormous potential. In other words, they all thought they could get rich here. Others wanted to start a new life free of religious intolerance and persecution. People from England and other parts of Europe traveled to different regions for different reasons. Slowly, these regions and the colonies within them began to take shape. The southern colonies had warm weather and adequate rainfall. Small farms and large plantations began to dot the landscape. The large plantations had many enslaved Africans working on them. The economy in the South was based on farming cash crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. The tobacco, rice, and indigo were exported to England and the West Indies and sold by merchants there. Trade among the 13 colonies also began to grow. The soil in the New England colonies was not as suitable for farming. Oh, yes, there were some small farms, but due to the abundance of forests, timber became an important trade good. Over in England, many of the forests had been cut down by the time the colonies were established. So timber to make ships and homes was being exported over to England. Other colonies also needed timber to build fishing and trading ships, homes, and barrels. Farming, though, was the main source of income in the Middle Atlantic or breadbasket colonies. Wheat was grown abundantly, so that's how it got its special nickname, the breadbasket colonies. Mills were also built, and the wheat produced was ground into flour and sold to other colonies. Large amounts of flour were also sold to England and its colonies in the West Indies. Settlers from around the world came to this region, resulting in a wide variety of cultures within the middle colonies. Can you imagine what it was like to grow up back then? Let's find out what life was like in the English colonies. In the early days, only boys who lived in Massachusetts had to go to school. The first schools were one-room schoolhouses. Boys of different ages learned reading, writing, and math. Sometimes the older boys helped to teach the younger ones. In 1647, a law was passed in Massachusetts that required every town with 50 or more families to support an elementary school. Towns with more than 100 families had to support a grammar school where boys would learn Latin to prepare for college. This was the beginning of public education in America. Over time, every colony began to provide a basic public education. The very first college, Harvard, was founded in New England in 1636. In 1693, the College of William and Mary was founded in Virginia. The second college created, William and Mary, was named after King William III and Queen Mary II of England. Some boys attended private schools and others were educated at home. Puritan girls were taught to read so they could read the Bible. For many children, the main part of their education was learning a skill so that they would be able to grow up and support a family. For girls, this meant learning household skills such as cooking, tending a garden, sewing, making candles, and raising children. Some girls might even learn to become dressmakers. For boys, farming was one of the main occupations. There were many different kinds of apprenticeships too. Boys as young as 11 years old would serve as apprentices and learn a skill from an experienced artisan. They could learn to be shoemakers, blacksmiths, carpenters, shipbuilders, printers, surveyors, millers, merchants, and glassmakers, among other things. And it said the skill of glass blowing was brought to the colonies by settlers from Poland and Germany. So glass factories became prominent in the middle colonies. Boys, in addition to all those different skills, could also train to become lawyers, doctors, or teachers. Boys would often leave home at the age of 11 and go to live as apprentices with the skilled artisans who were training them. Their workday was usually about 12 hours long. Apprentices were provided with food and a place to live, but they were not paid. Apprenticeships would last for several years, and at the end of the apprenticeship, they could join an existing business or even start their own. And this one's showing you, see the barrel making? Daily chores. Even young children had lots of chores to do. If you lived on a farm, and many people did, you would gather firewood, tend the farm animals, milk the cows, collect eggs from the chickens, make candles, plant and harvest vegetables, and carry water from the well. Almost all of your food came from your own farm. This had to be accomplished without the luxuries of electricity, indoor plumbing, or central heating or air conditioning. Life in the colonies was not all work and no play, though. Because children spent a large part of their day doing chores, they often found ways to make a game out of their work. For instance, if they were gardening, they might make a game of hide and seek after they finished weeding the garden or picking the vegetables. If they were carding wool, which means separating the fibers in preparation for spinning, or carrying firewood or churning butter, siblings or brothers and sisters might race one another to see who could finish first. Children might also sing songs or tell stories and riddles as they worked. When their chores were done, they played games like blind man's bluff, hopscotch, tag, and a form of jacks using rocks. There were no toy stores back then, so colonists made toys from things they had in their homes or farms, such as these dolls made from corn husks or rags. If they had wood, leather, or string left over, they might make a toy out of it, such as a top or spinner, or a game like the familiar cup and ball game. Colonists made board games they could play too. One favorite toy might be a hoop left over from barrel making. Children would turn the hoops on their side and roll them with a stick through the streets. Religion played a key role in the development of many of the colonies. Christians often read the Bible to their children, and the children were required to memorize Bible passages. For Christians in New England, attending church was the most important thing they did. In fact, if you were a Puritan, it was compulsory. Compulsory means required. Puritans worshiped in a meeting house. Sermons could last for several hours, and if you fell asleep during the service, there was sometimes assigned someone to wake you up. That person had a long pole with feathers. See this? On one end. So if a person fell asleep, he just tickled their chin with the feathers. As you learned in the early day of the colonies, most people produced the food they ate. Corn was a very important crop to the colonists, just as it was to the Native Americans. And do you remember what other name Native Americans called corn? I'm hoping you're thinking maize. Colonists used corn in a variety of ways. There was cornbread, corn cake, boiled corn, fried corn, corn soup, and corn on the cob. Besides farming, some colonists also hunted and fished. The colonists learned to harvest regional fruits and berries, and they used them in their cooking for seasoning and in pies. Apparently, colonists had a sweet tooth, just like we do today. Historians have recorded stories about how colonists loved hard candies, pies, and puddings. As the colonies grew, towns became cities. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston became the largest. The architectural style of each region often imitated or copied the European countries where many of these colonies originated. There were many red brick English-style homes in New England, Dutch-style wooden homes with sloping roofs in the Middle Atlantic, and French-style farmhouses with wide porches and French doors in the southern regions. So you have the English style, the Dutch style, and the French style. In addition, Charleston architecture had a Caribbean influence because many settlers arrived there from the English islands of Barbados in the Caribbean Sea. The streets of these towns and cities became busy with horses, wagons, and people. Not everyone worked as a farmer, artisan, or apprentice. There were many wealthy people who lived in very fine houses in these large cities. Their houses contained only the best furniture, silver, china, and fabrics shipped from England. In the early days of the colonies, people relied heavily on imported goods from England. But as the years went on, the colonists began to manufacture or produce some of these things themselves. However, the English Parliament still controlled how much manufacturing the colonists were allowed to do. The English did not want to lose money they made by selling their goods to the colonists. The wealthy colonists paid attention to English fashions, and even on the hottest days could be seen wearing the most elaborate clothing made of the finest materials. Men wore lace stockings and ruffles. They carried swords and powdered their hair. Women wore big, puffy, many-layered dresses and towering hair designs when they were in fashion. Those less affluent or less wealthy colonists who did physical labor wore clothes that were made of simpler materials, and they often made their own clothes or wore clothes given to them by others. Communication between the colonies was difficult. Most roads were nothing more than wagon trails, although in some of the larger cities there were a few established highways. Ships traveled up and down rivers and along the coast to bring goods and news from far away. Written communication was one of the only ways of sending and receiving messages, but letters could take weeks, if not months, to arrive. Frequently, letters would go missing. Medicine back then was basic, and people died of diseases that are quite curable today. Women gave birth at home with the help of midwives, and because they did not have medical care we do today, sometimes women even died during childbirth, and many babies died before they reached their first birthday. However, life away from the crowded European towns and cities was somewhat healthier. Thanks for listening today, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.